Hello, welcome back to the studio. Today's painting is The Enchanted Doorway, but it could be a church or whatever you want it to be for your own particular painting. Now, the backstory to this painting is it started out as a different sort of picture back in 2006, when it was this painting, which is a little doorway with some nice sort of spring or summer flowers around it. My other half said, why don't we paint that and turn it into a winter scene? So I have. Now, it's not as complicated as it looks, and you should watch the video all the way through because I use a stencil to do this. I designed it specially for beginners to learn to paint complex shapes. If you want a copy of the stencil, there's a link in the description below which will take you to our website. There you'll see a downloadable PDF which you can print off at home. So you know the routine. Sit back, relax, scissors at the ready, and see how we get on with painting this version of The Enchanted Doorway. Happy snowy painting, people. So here's my canvas, 14 inches by 18 for this project, but it's the wrong colour. I want this to be a sort of a warm stone colour. This colour, buff titanium. You can mix up white with some ochre and make your own version of this. It'll put a smile on your face for sure. I use a little roller and apply a couple of thin coats. Make sure you allow time for these to dry completely. So here's my nice dry canvas. First thing you need to do is to put out a little layout line. I'll use a ruler and a pencil, and I want to mark off a point 5.5 inches from the right hand corner. Vary this dependent on the size of the canvas you're using. A little pencil mark here will give me the centre line for the doorway on the stencil. Just there. Next step is position this carefully, and I'm going to use a couple of little bits of masking tape at the top to hold it in position, and maybe add a couple of little reference marks in the bottom corners in case things come unstuck. To prepare my stencil, I fold it down the centre, and I want to make a little snip just here at the bottom, and I can then reach through the little hole with a pair of scissors and trim out that first line. It says first cut. Now then, top tip here, this is not a symmetrical pattern. I sort of did it freehand really, so if you try and fold it in half and cut it out, you'll end up with a really wonky door. So trim round each section in turn. There we are, line up the stencil, top corners and those little bottom corner marks, and then a couple of little bits of masking tape to hold it firm. These are the brushes I'm going to use. This one is my favourite, this one may be a little soft, so use a stiffer brush is my advice. Here's a little drop of black acrylic, and you want to smudge this out until your brush is almost completely dry. We'll have a little practice on the side first, but the idea here is to use a brush that's almost completely dry. Here you see, with an almost dry brush, you can sort of stipple on some paint, make a nice speckly effect with the brush, but more especially you can actually just rub with the side of the brush and leave a sort of a smudge like charcoal, except it's acrylic paint. The harder you push and the longer you sit in one spot, the darker the smudge. Is this a clue as to how we're going to do our painting, I think? Let's begin. Load a small amount of paint on your brush. Test it on your canvas on a piece of scrap paper, and then hold your stencil firmly in position, and at an angle just rub the brush against the canvas. And just like that, you start to leave a little shadow line. I like to start off by working all the way around the outside to leave the initial line, and then I can go back in and darken an area or two. I dreamt up this project many years ago because I knew many people wanted to paint complex shapes like doorways and symmetrical shapes that were difficult to draw and figure out how to paint. This, I hope, explains how we're going to do our painting all the way through. It's a simple process and very enjoyable, and one that I've enjoyed teaching many times. Let's add a little more detail to our door. I want to put on some little individual planks. I think the light's coming from the left hand side, and the door is recessed, so it's a bit more shadow on that left hand side, but as I say, a couple of planks here and there really add a bit more character. Again, just lean your brush at a slight angle and just gently shade in the area where you think you want some detail. I'll add a little bit of dark colour to the base of the door, and maybe just a few sort of cracks and marks across the wood to indicate that there's some sort of nice wood grain effect going on. Now, on to the next step. Trim out the next layer of the door frame. Each layer is colour coordinated and marked. Steps 1, 2 and 3, so it's very easy to see what to do next. Again, get your brush in just the right amount of paint on it and very lightly rub against the side of the stencil. As you can see, by darkening this edge and saving a little bit of light here, it looks as though the door is recessed back into a frame. When the brush gets a little clogged, just give it a good dry clean on a piece of paper towel. Top tip here though, don't wash your brush. Let it dry out and scrub off the dry paint and then carry on. If the brush gets wet, it becomes smeary, and we want to still get that nice smudging effect. As you can see, I'll add one successive layer after another to my door. These little tabs on the side here, they're little sort of stones that link the frame into the wall. I just bend them back, but you could just tear them off or trim them off, whichever's easiest. Again, lay your brush at an angle and scrub into those little tiny cutouts, and make sure you get a good amount of paint. Keep checking your stencil as you go. My, our door is looking really nice. Next step, let's add a little window. I find it easier just to trim off the window itself. It's exactly like doing the door. Position it, make a little mark so that you know when you lift it off you can put it back in exactly the same spot. This time I want to put a little bit of shading across the window. I'm going to add LED lights to it, and I want to do a little sort of a light crisscross pattern here. It doesn't have to be too exact, just a light reference, and indeed I keep all of the details on my windows and doors very loose and easy to reproduce. I'll add a little bit of a frame detail as well. Now, time for the steps. Same process as before. I like to fold it in half and cut out the areas which say cut out. No surprises there. You can do one little step at a time or do them all at the same time. At the top you see I left a little piece here called door. With a steady hand, mine's not very steady is it, I trim off that little tiny piece because that is the layout line for the steps. I line it up so that the door fits into that little pocket. There we are, and then with a couple of little bits of tape I'll just secure it in place. It's probably easiest actually to cut out all of the steps in one go, but as you see, if you want to do one at a time, that's fine. Think about the steps overhanging some bricks, so you want a little shadow line under the top edge. If you want to create the effect of some bricks or some blocks, just use a little offcut of the paper stencil and just rub against the corner to produce a little line. Once again, this can be very random and sort of loose, so you don't have to be too mechanical about it. Here you see I've actually trimmed out all of the remaining steps. I like to just darken in the corners first so I can use them as a reference point, and then once again darken under the edge. I hope my video is filling you full of confidence. I believe that anybody could do this painting with a stencil. Now let's create some blocks for the walls. I kept that little cutout of the door and put it to one side. Now just make some random sort of shapes. Just snip through and cut out little sort of squares and blocks for our stonework. This one is a nice sort of filler. It fits in lots of different places, and of course with several different shapes and sizes you can fill in these little edges beside the step. Just line it up over the top of the painting that you've already created, and then once you've got a corner lined up, just slide it to one side slightly and then just lightly dab or stipple in some paint. I hope my painting looks a bit like a granite wall, something nice and old. So I stipple and tap on the paint and do a few checks as I go. Once you get the technique down, it's very simple. I like to put in a couple of these longer stones directly under my window so that it looks like a windowsill. That'll be very useful later on when we start adding some snow to the painting. With almost no paint left on my brush, I want to just tone down some of this brickwork and add a little bit more aging here and there. A few sort of smudges and dirty marks really help tone down the walls and give them a bit more age, especially on the front of the steps as well. I want this painting to look very old. I'll also add a little bit of a smudge down here to indicate maybe a path or a walkway in front of the steps. I need a little bit of shadow here to make the snow work. Now what to do about this big blob? Well, here's a neat little trick. I'm going to take my old favourite, a piece of old car sponge, stipple it in to a little bit of the black acrylic. Don't worry about those droplets, it's where I dampen down my palette with a little sprayer to keep the paint active and working. And I'm going to just stipple on a little bit of dark foliage. We'll add some colour over this, but it's important that we manage to make this sort of fit into and around all the brickwork. I also try and get it over the ends of a couple of steps just to set them back into the painting a little further. I think my background is almost complete. But time for some detail. I take a little liner brush and a few drops of water, and I want to add on a few little hinges to my door. Have a look online for different designs. There are many designs for these little hinges, ranging from very complex to quite simple. I keep mine quite small to start with. I'll sort of increase the size a little bit as I get happier with the various designs I come up with. I sometimes find it easier to sketch something out on a piece of paper before I actually get going on my painting. There we go. I like the design. I'm going to beef it up a little bit, make it look a bit stronger, and give him a little friend as well. It doesn't matter if they're not exactly perfect. I'll also add a few of those nice little details to these old doors, a few nice studs or cobnails as I think they're called, and of course we need a way to open the door, so I'll add a little handle to this side. Now time for our window. I want to put some lead bars across this to give it a real authentic look. I've got my liner brush and some thinned out acrylic black. Top tip, keep this nice and simple. You'll see why later on in the painting. So we're about halfway through the painting. I'm going to be using oils for the next stage, but if you want to continue using acrylic paints, that's absolutely fine. Just remember, they're not as transparent maybe as oils, so you'll have to thin them down with a little drop of water and just work them into the painting a little bit more. Take your time, do a little test sample on the side and make sure you've got the consistency of paint just right. You want all the colours to be thin and transparent, especially for the door and the brickwork. The snow, well, you can put as much of that on as you want. Back to the painting. Time for some oils, and for this I'm going to start with some Bob Ross liquid clear oil paint. I want to put a very thin coat on my painting, and I've got some in a little airtight pot. I've got an old 1-inch brush to use as well. Scrub this on very thinly. Check, make sure you've got the smallest amount on the painting. If you're going to be doing this painting as an acrylic, then obviously you won't be doing this step. Just have a dry canvas. Now, I've washed out our little bristle brush that I created the underpainting with. I'm going to use the same brush to add some colour. I've laid out my palette and I'll put down the colours in the description below. There's actually a colour missing, which is the Prussian blue colour. But the first colour I'm going to start off with is some dark sienna. It's sort of a nice ruddy brown colour. I think it'll go well on our door. I can always darken it with some black as well. This is going to be used as a glaze. Sorry, get my pinky out of the way. I'm going to use this as a glaze so that the dark underpainting we put on there, all those shadows, actually pick up in the colours that we're glazing over the top of. You can add more or less of this, and you can scrub it in very well. Let's darken it up a little bit. I want a slightly more sort of heading towards the Van Dyke Brown sort of tone for my doorway. I want to sort of emphasise a few more of those little splits and cracks. This is a very nice, easy little process, and you can just sit and play with your painting because the underpainting is still there. It doesn't matter what you do in oils, you can simply wipe it off. I use that darker colour to increase the depth of colour in the shading on this right hand side. But don't worry if you overdo it too much. It's very easy to remove. I've put a bit too much at the top of my door. I'm just going to use a cotton bud just to rub off some of the excess. You can dry clean your brush and just reblend it. Let's add a little colour to our stone walls. The same brown tones work just as well. Just rub it on lightly and just sort of warm the whole building up a little bit. If you go over the edges, it's fine. You can just rub it into the background. It just helps to age the building. You can see I made a mistake here and went over the edge, but it doesn't matter. Just rub it out. I'm going to brush mix some sap green and black together to make a very dark olivey green colour for my foliage. If you're doing this in acrylics, you can simply mix the dark green colour and thin it with a little water to make a wash. I want to tone this black down and say give it a nice sort of dark, almost sort of evergreen colour. Scrub it in very well and check it occasionally to make sure you've got a thin even green coat. That looks a bit oily to me, but you'll see how much coverage you're getting when you look at the background colours behind the black. You see all the beige colour sort of going a green tint. Now, the brushes I'm going to use are a fan brush and a small round brush, but you use whatever you have to hand. I'm first going to mix a shadow colour, titanium white and a little bit of Prussian blue. You'll find if you just make white snow colours, the painting looks sort of flat and uninteresting. Snow needs a blue tone to make it really pop. Try and imagine how you think snow would settle on these evergreens. And I'm going in just with the corner of the fan brush and just sort of stabbing at the painting. I just want to leave a little imprint of the bristles. Some nice little round lumps of snow fell here. Tops of bushes and maybe some lower areas as well. As my brush runs out of colour, I'll put in some little touches of underpainting. This is just barely visible and it will just help to fill out the painting slightly. I dry clean my brush and now load with the full white titanium colour. And just above those shadow blue colours, I want to stab in some more white. Stand back regularly and make sure you're liking the effect you're getting. It's very easy to overdo it and almost end up with a big iced cake at this stage, but there's almost no limit to how much snow you can put on your painting. I put a bit too much on here and there, but you wouldn't know. I'm going to change to the small round brush for this step, adding a little bit of snow to some of the features in my painting. I start off with just a little bit of that blue colour on the windowsill and on the steps. Then reload with a bit of the pure white colour and just add that lovely topping to it. I probably could have done something before this stage, but you'll see in a minute that I almost got myself into a pickle. So don't forget, watch the video all the way through before you start your own painting. That way you see my mistakes, if they are mistakes, before you start on your own work. Just use your imagination. Think about where snow could fall or could be blown. I quite like using this little round brush just to add some nice blobs of snow here and there. One wonders if I wouldn't have been better off to have used that instead of the fan brush. But you decide. I quite like both effects. But here you see, I just add small gobs of snow here and there. Little bits of blue, little bits of white. Just play with your painting. Backwards and forwards until you build it up. I even add a few little bits of snow to the stonework. It just gives it that nice sort of wintry look, doesn't it? I think someone's home. There's a light in the window. We better paint it. I'm going to use my small round brush that I dry cleaned with some red and Indian yellow to create a lovely rich warm orange tone. Again, this is just a glaze colour. I want a very thin amount of this, and you can do the same effect with acrylics. Just make an orange tone and thin it down with a few drops of water. If you scrub it on thinly, then you'll still see the little detail you painted on earlier. But now you'll see why I suggested not making that panes of glass too complicated. If you overdo it with this colour and you want to clean it up, and you've got hundreds of little panes of glass to clean, you're in for a bit of a task. Now, a little bit of cad yellow, just to add a little bit of extra glow. I'll add a little speck of titanium white to my yellow colour to give it a real sense of brightness. There we are. Perfect. A quick touch up with my cotton bud and I think my window's finished. I hear a blackbird. He's looking for some dinner. Let's give him a few nice little red berries. I use the point of my knife to pick up a dot of bright red paint, and just here and there and here, underneath the snow, I add a few little specks of bright red. That should keep him fed. I think a final touch. I want some of the glow from the light in the window to shine onto my snow. I'll use my little round brush just to add a few little bits of bright yellow colour here and there. Tops of the bushes, and maybe the windowsill, and even a little bit on the steps. So there you have it, the Enchanted Doorway with snow, an original painting by me. But if you want to watch more paintings done using gessos, there's a link right here. Make sure you watch all the videos right the way through. Happy painting, people, and Merry Christmas 2022.